Thank you, Alessia. You're so good at putting all this together, and it's an honor to participate for my 19th year. So as Alessia said, you know, the world has to decarbonize. That's a given. That is, despite some occasional bumps in the road, that's the direction we're heading without any question. Transportation represents something over 20% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And interestingly, as Jennifer might tell us, she's a real expert in the data around this sector, the emissions from transport have actually been growing despite the extraordinary success of EVs that we will talk about, among other things here. I rode over here this morning in a BMW i7, an amazing all-electric vehicle, shockingly efficient and luxurious. It's just incredible what's happened with EVs. And then on the EV side too, we have to factor in the incredible role of China in changing the whole global EV equation, which is sort of looming in the background of any discussion on this topic, that not only is China leading in pricing in EVs, and to the point that they can't even sell them in the US now, they're such a threat, but they're increasingly dominating the entire value chain, from the processing of the minerals to the manufacture of the batteries, et cetera. At the same time, there is extraordinary innovation all around the world, including here in Europe, including at BMW, on a wide range of elements in the decarbonization ecosystem. And hydrogen, which isn't discussed as much as you may not be too familiar with what's happened and happening with hydrogen in transportation, but BMW has been doing hydrogen vehicles for 45 years. They used to burn hydrogen to power a car. Now it's about fuel cells. We're going to hear exactly what that means. And Michael here is the Vice President for Hydrogen Vehicles at BMW, and one of the world's top experts on hydrogen. They call them fuel cell electric vehicles, and he'll explain why. They are a form of electric vehicle. So Michael's our hydrogen expert. Jennifer Dungs is global head of mobility at an amazing group called EIT InnoEnergy, which is a huge climate tech investor. Just quickly define what EIT InnoEnergy is, because it's a little unique.
So we are a climate investor. We're investing in both the US and Europe, but primarily Europe. And the focus is on hardware. So there aren't so many hardware-focused investors, and connected to that is not just investing in a hardware, let's say in this case, the electric mobility per se, but it's building up the industrial value chains that support that technology. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is global resilience, but also just GDP and jobs. And so we don't want to be just the users of sustainable technology, but actually create the economy of jobs, et cetera, to support that change.
Particularly in Europe, EIT InnoEnergy having been initially seeded by the EU and financed, but it's now kind of spinning off to be a completely commercial operation going forward.
And so maybe just related to today's topic, we have established 3 industrial value chains, one which is called the European Battery Alliance, a second one called the European Green Hydrogen Acceleration Center, and a last one on solar, with all the same intent of building that muscle or securing that muscle here in Europe.
Yes, which is definitely desirable. And she's the head of mobility there, but honestly, I think more than anybody I've ever met, she has the facts of what's happening in the automotive industry at her fingertips like nobody I've ever met. But Michael, let's start and first of all, explain what is a fuel cell electric vehicle and how does it work? How is it different?
So maybe before we step into it, the future is clearly electric, and with all our doings, with all our intensive work to bring down CO2 emissions, we see electric vehicles as main technology. If we talk about electric vehicles, we talk about battery electric vehicles, which you probably drove today, which store the energy in a huge battery. And this is absolutely an awesome technology which will play a major, maybe a dominant role in the automotive sector. If you're talking about fuel cell electric vehicles, we are also talking about electric vehicles. So from a customer perspective, it drives like an electric car. It's no difference. You do not feel the difference between battery electric and fuel cell electric vehicles once you drive one. The main difference is how the energy is stored. And instead of storing the energy within the car in huge batteries, in fuel cell electric vehicles, the energy is stored as gas, as hydrogen gas in a hydrogen tank. And this hydrogen is then converted within the fuel cell to electricity and water. So what comes out of the car is water vapor, nothing but sheer water vapor, and you do the propulsion with the electricity. And this is also the main point, the main difference between, from a customer perspective, between battery electric vehicles and fuel cell electric vehicles when it comes to refueling, because you just plug it in and refuel the car. And maybe if I raise one question, how fast do you think an electric and fuel cell electric vehicle does refuel? So who's thinking about 20 minutes here? So 10, 5, closer. So it's 3 to 4 minutes to fill it up entirely. So from 0 to 100, and this is the main difference from a customer's perspective.
Yeah, and in fact, fuel cells are used a lot in industrial contexts, including at BMW, as I understand it, and at Walmart and elsewhere, for things like forklifts, because they are so rapidly refueled, and they don't want to have a forklift sitting on a charging station for however long. And you know, I think the hydrogen story is multifaceted. We've heard a lot about hydrogen in the United States in the last couple of years. After the Inflation Reduction Act put in a lot of incentives for hydrogen, we now have this network of hydrogen hubs that the Biden administration and the Department of Energy has been building up. And there is a lot of optimism about the potential of hydrogen in the energy transition because, as Michael said, when it burns or when it just creates water as the exhaust. So it is a completely emissions-free, non-polluting technology, assuming that it doesn't leak, which we're not even going to get into here, because if that happens, it's another story. But so, Michael, okay, explain BMW's thinking about this dichotomy between the extraordinary success that the world has had with batteries and your own extraordinary success building cars like the i7 that I wrote in this morning. Why, despite that, are you still so committed to hydrogen fuel cells?
Yeah, so first of all, we are fully committed to bringing down CO2 emissions, as I just said.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we are a company which sells cars, obviously, as a main business. And what we've learned the last decades in bringing down CO2 emissions and fulfill customers' needs at the same time is that we have to leverage all technologies that are available. And that's why we defined the strategy of technology openness, which means let the politics decide on targets, let the OEMs work out what is the right technology, and let the customers the choice to choose what's right for them. And as I just said, battery electric vehicles will play a predominant role because it's a great way to decarbonize, and we are fully committed to electric vehicles, especially to battery electric vehicles. Nevertheless, if you think it to 100%, we think there is a need for a second technology alongside battery electric vehicles to walk along this way towards zero emission entirely, and this is fuel cell electric vehicles. And we think it is good to have a second option, a second pillar besides battery electric vehicles to have this decarbonization. And here also comes geopolitics into play, because...
Yes, I want to get to that.
Sorry for,
please, we'll come
for
back.
taking your point. So if you have a look at the battery electric vehicle supply chain, you will quickly see that battery electric cars have huge batteries, and we are talking about 500, 600, 700, 800 kilograms of certain raw materials. And you probably know all those materials, which are foremost coming out of China or in Chinese supply chains. And different from battery electric vehicles, fuel cell electric vehicles engage entirely different materials. And this is what we think makes us more resilient as a company, to be a little bit more independent of those raw materials. We are also tackling this point on the battery electric side for sure, but nevertheless it makes us more resilient to have a second leg towards zero emission.
Yeah. But what, I mean, has it been challenging fuel cells have been in the industry for a long time. And in fact, it's harder than it was to be making the case you're making. But yet, I'm so impressed at the conviction that you still have about the necessity to keep this technology viable in the marketplace. So talk a little bit about that determination and why it doesn't deter you. Even some other companies have shifted away from fuel cells in recent years.
Maybe there are two predominant hurdles. The one is technology, and the other is refueling infrastructure. Talking about technology, we are right now, since approximately 2 years, we are running a small pilot fleet of iX5 hydrogen cars, which definitely prove under any circumstances, environmental circumstances and so on, that this technology is very capable, very robust. So tick in the box on technology. The other point, refueling stations. So to utilize the benefit of fast refueling, as I just said, 3 to 4 minutes for filling it entirely up, you need to have stations, right? Pretty simple. And at the moment, there are only few stations around.
In California is one of the few places where there's quite a few, yeah.
So there's
70.
There's Korea, there's Japan, there are some in Germany, there are some in California, but it's not sufficient infrastructure right there. And that's why we decided, and we also communicated on this, that we go into serious production in 2028, because we think until then there will be enough refueling stations. Why do we think this? There is lots of dynamics going on the transportation side, so like heavy duty and commercial vehicles. For them, this applies what you just said, so operational times and payloads at the end. And secondly, there are strategies within the regions. For example, the European region has defined that there has to be a refueling station every 200 kilometers along the entire TEN-T network within Europe.
Is there a time frame on that?
2030.
Okay.
So. And it's written down within the directive, so the RFID.
That'll make a big difference, yeah. You want to go on?
No.
You know, one of the things, just to quickly mention, that when you think about hydrogen, what you really, especially for mobility, you need to think of it as a storage medium for energy. That's what it is. It's like a battery. It's a way of creating energy and moving it somewhere else to use it. So that's not all, people think of it in a different way, but that's an important distinction. But Jennifer, you know, you do look at the entire landscape of mobility and automobiles. So when you look at the landscape, what are you seeing as the big trends, and how do you see hydrogen fuel cells fitting into that?
I think to start, we're at the tipping point now, arguably. So in this year, it's anticipated that we will have 25% of the automotive sales globally will be battery electric. In China, they've already kind of passed the tipping point, but elsewhere, it depends on where you're at. This is pretty exciting. We're still on track that by 2031, we'll have 50% of the sales be battery electric.
That's a global prediction?
Yep. Yeah. And what's inspiring, because we're technology agnostic, is just the advancements that have happened on the technology with respect to, let's say, 4 different topics. So one is cost. We've reached price parity when you look at the battery pack price compared to the internal combustion engine. We have 371 models or so that are being offered in the European market, which is up tenfold where we were, back by 2017 or so, or 5 years ago. We have the range, where more than 45% of the vehicles sold in Europe are between 380 and 540 kilometers. So that's
good.
really
Boy, that's a huge
improved.
improvement.
And if you look at the averages in the US, they're going up. And the last point is the battery lifetime, where it was hypothesized for quite a long time that we would need to replace our batteries before the lifetime of the car. And there's a study from P3 last year and a study in 2023 based on real-world data showing that over 200,000 kilometers, you still have 80% state of health. And the point is not the exact numbers, but rather just the trend that the technology the technology has advanced faster than we predicted. So this is super exciting. But a few minutes ago, you brought up a topic that if you would have asked what keeps me up at night, I would have said exactly that topic, which is the supply chain. So 83% of the battery capacity for automotive is coming from Asia.
Overwhelmingly from China. Yeah.
Yes, and that puts us at a great risk, especially today when we all think of the geopolitics and tariffs and the global tensions. The battery is around 40% of the cost of the car. That's a huge price lever that Asia or any country who owns that component part can impact on the whole product. And I think every night of the 14 million jobs in the automotive industry in Europe and how sensitive we are if we depend solely on, a supply chain that's not within our shared values, whether that's the US and Europe together or vice versa. So our focus at our company has been kind of solely to build up the battery value chain. And I just share a couple numbers. As of the end of last year, we had 17 gigafactories for doing battery packs and battery cell manufacturing in Europe.
Underway in one form or another.
Operating.
17 gigafactories.
And 5 years ago, we had 0. And this is the same story if you want to look at lithium projects. Those aren't all operating, but we have 20 to 25 projects planned or in planning. We have 35 recycling plants that are in operation, arguably at low volumes because we don't have so much volumes. But is it enough? No. And Astro I just want to make a connection to Google X. He said this morning, and if you saw that presentation, the difference between, would you invest or do a project where you would get a 1 million return for your company versus a 1 billion, and we have to take risks, and we have to have a funding structure and an environment that allows us to do big, visionary things. And for me, building a battery value chain is a big visionary thing, and we need to work together with all institutions and all governments and all funding to realize that. And if that's also for hydrogen, it would be the same. I mean, whatever technology that's running our industries, we need to have an environment to support them.
So to keep a hydrogen ecosystem alive is a form of resilience, in a sense, for the for the European auto industry in particular. And if we are overwhelmingly dependent on a country whose relationship with us is uncertain for the long term, certainly in the United States right now, it's perceived to be quite an enemy by many. That is a precarious reality. And yet there's a lot of ways to build that resilience. So Michael, talk to us about that part of it. Do you see fuel cell EVs as a form of resilience for the industry? Is that part of the thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. As I just said, the main fact is that fuel cell electric vehicles engage entirely different materials.
Yeah.
So you make yourself independent from what we just discussed. Whether this is really necessary or not, we will see, the future will bring. But we see right now a real risk exposure on China on these materials. And that's why we think that having another technology, a second technology alongside battery electric vehicles makes us as a company more resilient. And resilience is one of the most important things. But let me bring in another thought, because we are not only talking about automotive industry, transportation sector. Hydrogen is a topic of the entire energy system at the end. And it's no secret that hydrogen vehicles are less efficient than battery electric vehicles. So
less efficient on energy to the wheel. Yeah.
It's from a energy to wheel perspective, it's much more efficient to just plug your car. If you have solar panels on the roof, to plug your car in and drive electrically is the best way. So there's absolutely no secret. But at the same time, if you have a look at the entire energy system, you will immediately realize that if you want to decarbonize the entire energy system, there is a massive need for extension of renewable energies. And the main difference between renewable energies and fossil fuels is that they are absolutely not in line with the demand. So they are dislinked in timing and in location from the takeoff. So they are produced in sunny times on solar panels, they are produced in windy times with windmills, and it's dislinked from the takeoff. And therefore is a massive need for an energy carrier to carry this energy from coastal areas to city centers or to industrial centers, and to store this energy from summer times to winter times. And the only way to do this probably is hydrogen.
Right.
And if there is hydrogen, why not using it as a fuel? And by the way, it's much less efficient to curtail this energy instead of just using it to drive hydrogen vehicles.
And if the hydrogen is produced from water using an electrolyzer and renewable energy, it is an entirely green ecosystem.
Yes.
However, we do need to point out that most hydrogen in the world today is not produced that way, and green hydrogen, if it's produced in the manner I described, is dramatically more expensive today. So this is a real ecosystem challenge.
David, I just want to add on this point, because it's super exciting what's happening with green hydrogen, but what it's unlocked in addition is other hard-to-abate industries that
Right.
can benefit even more from green hydrogen. And that's things like we're seeing now, green steel. Arguably, it is more expensive. We're not at price parity, but the impact that would have on the decarbonization targets, or for example, green fertilizer. And I think none of us have a crystal ball, so at the end we don't know what demand will come from what sector, but it's kind of thrown another, like ball in the mix where we can't predict it, but there's other sectors that will really benefit from green hydrogen that could have even more of a decarbonization effect, and so we'll have to look how that develops.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, the one thing that seems apparent is for BMW to succeed in fuel cell EVs, you're going to have to work in an ecosystem more actively maybe than a new ecosystem, right? So is your company actively engaged in partnering with atypical new kinds of partners in the energy area, in the various electrolyzers, I don't know what. Talk about some of the things you do that are different.
So obviously this thing is so big that we as BMW cannot do it on our own. That's pretty clear. And on the technology side, we are partnering with Toyota, which are experts on fuel cell electric vehicles since decades, I'd almost say. And we have a very strong partnership with Toyota, where we also bring in our competency, and we are developing fuel cell systems really jointly. And this was the technology portion. And on the entire ecosystem or hydrogen production portion, we are in talks with several players in the industry, but I cannot disclose right now.
Okay. Yeah. I think, is this clock right? Have we really run out of time already? Okay. That's great. I guess I didn't realize that. I thought that we were still...
What a coincidence.
But before we wrap, what are some use cases that you see for fuel cell EVs?
So in particular, for fuel cell electric vehicles, every customer who wants to be quickly at some other destination, especially if you're towing heavy heavy trailers. When the range comes down, you utilize the quick refueling time and you drive like you're used to with a petrol engine. And for all people who are not able to charge at home, to charge at work, for them, battery electric vehicles might be a little bit painful.
Yeah.
It's the only way to decarbonize.
And in places like Japan, for example, they don't really charge at home much, so there's more use case there. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.